Hi, everyone. Welcome to our newest episode of Community Connection. I am Vicki Alorcia Casella, one of your hosts, licensed professional counselor, joined with my co-host, like always, Mark Henney from Chestnut Hill College. How are you today, Mark?
I am doing well, and yourself today, Vicki?
One day at a time, taking those deep breaths in every moment.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah, so we are very excited about our topic today, which is about kids counseling and discussing anxiety and ADHD. And we think that this is something that our community will really benefit in learning about, primarily because of the stressors with schooling right now for the parents, for the students, for the teachers, and behaviors that I'm sure increased at this point just because of everything that's been going on. So without further ado, our guest from St. Luke's Hospital, Abby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Abby, and Abby Reese, and I work at St. Luke's Behavioral Health Outpatient. I work with kids ranging in age from 4 all the way up to 18. I do take some young adults, but my biggest age range, I would say, is probably between like the 6 and 12 range. I am an LCSW. I do a lot of play therapy. I'm not yet a registered play therapist, but that's on the bucket list. But I do a lot of play therapy in my practice.
That's wonderful. Okay, so to start us off, if you could just provide our community with the definitions of anxiety and ADHD, just so we can kind of learn the definition about them.
Okay, so ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is what those letters stand for, and it's really characterized as an ongoing brain disorder, really, where there's inattention, they're easily off task, there's difficulty focusing, a lot of disorganization. And part of the definition of that is that, it's something that affects functioning and development. Anxiety is really where there's excessive worry, intense worry, sometimes it's about everyday things. It can be very general, but then there are also subtypes of anxiety. So in kids, we often see a lot of separation anxiety. We see social anxiety. That's where, a lot of times if a child is having like school refusal, sometimes that'll come up as a social anxiety kind of thing. But they're very much related. Oftentimes kids who have ADHD will also have anxiety. So it's very common for them to be sort of interwoven.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So, Abby, how do parents or loved ones, caregivers of children notice these symptoms?
Okay, so a lot of the symptoms, especially with ADHD, a lot of the symptoms are more pronounced versions of typical behaviors in kids. So it can be hard. It can be hard to be like, is this typical, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old behavior, or is this something more? So again, going back to that definition, it has to be something that's affecting their functioning, their development, which is why we often see ADHD being diagnosed in early elementary school, because that's when we really start to see those symptoms coming out. Not being able to sit in a seat in class and sit still, constantly getting up out of their chair, sort of looking around the room, not being able to really, keep their focus on something for more than a few minutes at a time. you know, they're constantly in motion, you know, even when they try to sit still, they can't stop moving. You know, and ADHD, and I should go back to this. So ADHD has 2 subtypes.
Okay.
And so there's the hyperactivity / impulsive, and then there's the inattention. And then some kids have a combined type where they have both of those things going on. And so the inattention is really where they're getting more off task, they're really having that difficulty focusing, and that's where you're going to really see that disorganization come into play. That no matter what, you know, tools you sort of try and provide, it seems like the book bag's always messy, the room's always messy, the desk at school's always messy. You know, the hyperactivity, impulsivity, that's where you get more of that fidgetiness, that constant motion, talking when it's not really appropriate to be talking. So, and then along with the hyperactivity comes that impulsiveness, really not making those split-second decisions without really considering the consequences of what might happen if they do this. There's that interrupting. Oftentimes, especially with the hyperactive type, that's where they'll also struggle with intrusiveness and understanding personal space as well. On the anxiety end of things, that's where you're going to have, you know, with anxiety, there's a lot of fidgetiness too. And so that's very common. You know, with the other symptoms, it's going to be, you know, again, having difficulty separating from, you know, a parent or caregiver, sleep issues. Oftentimes, there's a lot of bad dreams. There's fear of going to sleep. Difficulty concentrating is another one of those overlapping symptoms that happens. You might see them getting easily frustrated with anxiety, those constant expressions of like negative thoughts, right? Worried thoughts, crying, that sort of thing. Those would be some of the symptoms. So we can see where some of that overlap happens too there.
Are there specific techniques that you would recommend for, so like if a parent or a teacher, I mean, I'm sure it's different depending on who the caregiver is and what the environment is, but are there specific techniques that you would recommend that a parent or a teacher could try to encourage a child to utilize if we are noticing, you know, the hyperactivity or something that seems like anxiousness in our children?
Right. There's quite a few things that I think can be really helpful that parents, teachers can sort of implement. I think, especially when it comes to ADHD, having routine is like probably the most important thing that you can try and do. And that's so hard right now. COVID has made routine so hard. So trying to get it wherever you can, you know, if you're at home and, you know, your kids are doing cyber school, making sure that they have a set place where their schoolwork is being done, that, you know, TVs, phones are put away, you know, those as many distractions are removed as possible, that there's a start and an end time. I know one thing that I've encountered quite a bit lately is parents who are struggling because they have kids that are experiencing both ADHD and anxiety, right? And the kids are having a really hard time completing that online work, and they're sitting until 6-7 o'clock at night trying to get schoolwork done. And it's just it's not sustainable, it's not realistic. And so I think having a designated start and end time, just like you would for school, you know, and if your child is consistently not able to complete the work, talking with the school, you know, advocating for them about what can you guys do to try and help us out here, you know? And I know that the schools are struggling as well, but trying to make sure that those kids who have these diagnoses or may have these diagnoses are you know, getting the look and the attention that they need in order to be able to be successful with this process. So I think routine and really being consistent with that is one really important piece of that. I think as much as possible, limiting screen times. The truth is that screen, and I don't want to get on a soapbox about screens.
Okay, sure.
This is your time.
Yeah.
That, you know, there's research, there's science behind that screens impact brain development, you know, and that when they're on the screens, it also serves to give that instant gratification that's often present in that hyperactive type of ADHD. And when the screen is taken away, there's no longer that instant gratification. There's no longer that stimulation that, you know, most parents will recognize that their child can super focus on YouTube or a video game or something like that. But then when it's time to focus on schoolwork, it's like, what is going on, you know? And that's part of the science, right? Is that those screens, that it engages that part of the brain. And so, yeah, you can see the hyper focus there, but it makes it more challenging, more complicated when that's not part of the process. So limiting that as much as possible. I think as far as tools go, like, you know, skills that you can teach your child, one of the first things that I do with any kid that I work with that has ADHD or anxiety is a mindfulness grounding skill. You've probably done it with your clients too, is the 5 senses countdown.
Sure.
So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And I think that is probably the best grounding skill that you can give anyone, to be honest, because it's good for so many things. You know, it just gets your brain back to the room that you're in, what you're doing right then and there. And so with anxiety, you're sort of always in your head about stuff. So it gets you out of your head. With ADHD, you're sort of in your head in a different way. You know, you're looking around, you're you know, not able to really focus on what you need to be focusing on. And it gives you the practice to direct your focus. So I do that with almost every kid that I see. That's like the first skill that I teach them. The other thing with ADHD is the concept of stop, think, and act. You know, coming up with a plan. What's going to be your signal to yourself to stop? Are you going to imagine that big stop sign in front of your face? Are you going to, you know, snap your fingers to remind yourself? What are you going to do to get yourself to just put the brakes on? And then really going through that process of thinking through the decision. What are the consequences going to be? And with kids with ADHD, you know, there's a lack of that, the frontal lobe, right, where all of these processes take place, isn't fully developed, you know, and the research shows that part of the brain develops later with people with ADHD. And so they need help with this process. It's not just, well, you need to stop and think and then act, right? It's walking them through the process. When you see that they have a decision that they need to make, helping them to recognize, okay, how can you think this through? You know, what are your choices here? And I think that that's a really big piece of it, is in order to help them, there has to be adults in place who can recognize when they need it and can help them implement it. And that's how they're going to get to the place where they can do it on their own, you know? So that stop, think, and act is like one of the really basic ones, but one that you can really help with. And I'm sorry, I sort of went on a tangent.
No, go ahead,
No.
continue. I'm
Yes,
taking
please.
notes.
So, and I think the other thing, which is ironic because I just keep going on and on, but the thing with ADHD is you have to be succinct, right? When you're giving an instruction, you can't say, you know, go upstairs, get your shoes on, brush your teeth, pack your backpack, do all these. You have to give succinct, simple instructions and make that eye contact when you're doing it, you know? So if the task you want done right now is to go upstairs and brush your teeth, don't talk about everything else that has to be done after that. Just say, I need you to go upstairs and brush your teeth, you know? So that, because if you're given too many instructions, their brain is now 18 steps ahead and they have no clue what the first step was, you know? So giving those succinct instructions, you know, making that eye contact and making sure that they heard you. It's okay to say to them, tell me what you're going to do now, you know, after you give that instruction, tell me what you're going to do now, you know, and make sure that they've heard you and they know and they understand. It's a process that takes a lot of patience, you know, and it can be really trying. It can be even as a therapist, it can be trying sometimes, you know? So as a parent who's dealing with it day in and day out, it can be really trying. It can be really hard to like stay the course, you know? But if you do, that's where you're really helping them to develop those skills.
Thank you,
I didn't really talk much about
Yes. No, yeah, that was wonderful. Two different questions came up for me as I was listening to all that wonderful information. Is there different types of approaches that you or parents use with adolescents? And I guess the second question is, you know, you mentioned the parents needing patience. You know, and I guess we'll get to, maybe we can save that to the resource question, but how do parents find that support to maintain that ability to be present for their child, knowing that this is an up and down experience,
right.
so that they can stay, as you say, stay the course as best as they can as parents. So, but I was interested, maybe tied more to what you just talked about, is there different interventions around anxiety and ADHD when working with your adolescent population, like maybe your 12 to 18-year-olds?
Yeah. You know, I think with the older kids, I tend to get a little bit more into, and not that I don't introduce mindfulness to the younger kids. I think that's important, but I think sometimes with the younger kids, it's, you know, giving them more of a concrete type of skill, you know, and you know, the parents are sort of more involved at that point. With my teenagers, and I have a lovely workbook that I use with them oftentimes, and it's actually called Mindfulness for Teens with ADHD. It's a wonderful workbook. I love it. And there's just a lot of really awesome skills. It's really, and this is something that goes for both age groups, is getting them to recognize that ADHD isn't just weakness, right? Yes, there are challenges that you have to overcome, but there's also a lot of strengths in ADHD, right? They are some of the most creative individuals that you will find. And, you know, oftentimes I'll say to kids, especially like the teenagers, well, what's going to work for you? You know, they think outside the box. They figure out what the best thing is going to be, you know, and it can be really empowering for them. So, and again, that's with both groups, you know, if you're having a hard time, okay, let's come up with something different. You know, maybe this particular skill isn't working exactly the way that I'm talking about it. So how can we make it work for you? you know? So really engaging in using the strengths that come along with that, and building confidence in the ability to manage these symptoms, you know, manage these challenges.
Abby, I love that so much, how you just worded that about the strength and the creativity and the empowerment. You know, I think sometimes we might not give kids enough credit in what they can figure out, you know, because, oh, they're little and they just don't know. But sometimes they do know themselves a little bit better. And I love that, you know, you basically just said, like, don't forget about that. The fact that, like, we can ask the child, you know, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you feel? You know, are there options? Like, let's work together as a team, because then you're teaching them that teamwork as well. Like, you can help me and I can help you, and together we can figure out how to make this situation work for everyone involved. So I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things. And honestly, especially with everything that's going on right now, I think we all kind of get wrapped up into looking at things like, okay, we have a problem, we need to solve the problem, you know, like, and you know, I think that can sort of get lost in the shuffle. So remembering that, you know, they're probably going to have some solutions that are going to work probably much better than what we're suggesting. You know, so how can we engage them to do that? And I think so let me give you a little bit on the end of the anxiety piece of things, because we've, you know, talked a lot about, you know, what you can do in terms of ADHD. But I think as far as anxiety goes, and while some of it is very similar, and honestly, you know, mindfulness is one of those things that just, you know, because of what it does, because mindfulness is all about being present and focusing on right now, it's like one of the best tools that you can have in your pocket. So mindfulness for me is always going to come up as a treatment for pretty much anything, you know, is learning how to be mindful. But I think part of the anxiety is helping them to recognize, first of all, the biology behind it, you know, and you can do that with little kids too. Talking about what it means when your fight or flight system turns on, and how it was useful back in caveman days when we had saber-toothed tigers standing outside of our cave doors. But now, right, we don't have to deal with that. We're not going to wake up to that one morning. But we wake up to stress. We wake up to, I got to go to school. We wake up to the bully on the bus, right? Wake up to all of those things. And so, you know, maybe we're not actually fighting something. We're not actually running away from something, but that system still turns on. And the anxiety is created by those chemicals that are released by that system just sitting in your body, you know? And so if you can, with anxiety, help a child to release that somehow, you know, get some exercise, you know, go do something fun that you like to do that moves your whole body. Do some, you know, stretching, right? Get some peaceful movement going on. Those are all ways to release those anxious hormones, and then to be able to, now I can solve a problem. Now I can move on because, you know, my brain is functioning now, and it's not just the fight or flight, you know, turning on. I think anytime that you get a child to be able to recognize where in their body they experience that anxiety is also really important. So many kids with anxiety have these somatic complaints, right? They have headaches, they have stomach aches, they have body aches. And if you can get them to identify, okay, when I feel fearful, when I feel anxious, when I feel worried, this is what happens to my body, you know, that's even more empowering for them, because then they can recognize it. They can say, okay, I know that I was feeling just fine right before this, but now my stomach is hurting because I have to go to math class, and you know what, I really don't like math class, right? You know, just helping them to be able to think it through a little bit and notice those cues that your body gives you, you know? So I think all of those things. I think it's important to discuss anxieties, because obviously sometimes there's things going on that have to be addressed. But I also think it's important to control when and how much you talk about those anxieties.
Ooh, good.
Because some kids will talk about them all day long. And so then it's constantly on their mind. And they're never able to move on from it. But if you can set aside time and say, okay, every day after school, we're going to have our, 15 minutes, half an hour of time to just talk about whatever's going on, whatever's on your mind. And then you can help with solving problems that can be solved. And you can help with giving reassurance about things that maybe aren't as logical, right? And you can also then help them learn how to do that for themselves. You can say, okay, that sounds like a big problem. What's something we can do? Again, engaging them in solving those problems. And I think the other thing is with teaching them the skill, teaching them how to think it through logically, right? If the anxiety is something like, if I use someone else's pen, I'm going to get COVID, right? Logically, right? That's probably not going to happen, because what are we all doing right now? We're all washing our hands incessantly. We're wearing masks. We're not really sharing things all that much, We're not touching our faces. We're all being really cautious. So the likelihood that you accidentally picked up someone else's pen doesn't mean that you're going to get sick, And COVID has certainly ramped up the anxiety, especially anxiety related to germs. I think we're seeing more anxiety even about leaving the house, unfortunately. And I think that's only gonna increase as we, continue through this pandemic, and, helping them to recognize that the world is still a safe place. We can still be safe. We just have to do things a little bit differently right now. Yeah.
Wow. Wonderful points. Go ahead, Vicki.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's all I wanted to say. You got
Abby, you have Mark and I just in the state of like, oh, wow, like we have like 15 more things to comment on everything you're sharing. I wanted to just say that I love that you keep on emphasizing mindfulness. I think a thing that's difficult between maybe parents interacting with their children is trying to keep ourselves calm enough that we're not feeding into their chaos, so the mindfulness, it isn't just something that we should be teaching our kids, but also something that we should be implementing, because if they're in a state of frustration and then we're coming at them with their own frustration, I mean, that's probably not going to turn out well, so a lot of the things that I think you're even recommending for the kids are things that the parents or caregivers need to make sure that we're implementing. I mean, I always go back to self-care, for everyone across the board. But I think there was probably other comments I wanted to make, but I'll just leave it at the mindfulness. That's just great across the board for everyone to do. So go ahead, Mark. I know you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to have you expand on you were giving us a really great list of things, particularly with all children in the age group that you're working with. And I'm wondering if you talk about sleep and you talk about nutrition also when, dealing with anxiety, and, what's your experience around, there's a lot of research around adolescence, a lot of research about sleep deprivation across the lifespan, particularly in adolescence, though. Not keeping good sleep habits can also be a factor. And sometimes nutrition can be a factor too. So I don't know if
Mhm.
that's other things that you talked with your clients about.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. One of my questions on my psychosocial assessment is, what's the appetite like? What's the sleep habits? What are the sleep habits like? So absolutely, that's so important for so many things. I think and this is going back to that screen thing. We've gotten into this habit where everybody has a screen at bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
And I really try to talk with the parents. And I try and talk with the kids and really educate them on what the screens are doing. They're waking your brain up, And so I think the instinct at this point is, because we've gotten so used to having that technology, the instinct is, as soon as you can't fall asleep, you reach for a screen. And so I really encourage people to have the room fairly dark. A nightlight's okay, but have the room fairly dark. Remove the screens. Don't make that an option. Have a comfort item. There are a couple of kind of simple mindfulness-based exercises that I'll give to kids when it comes to sleep. One of them is to choose an object that they can hold in their hand. It can be something as simple as, I don't know, I'm just grabbing stuff off my desk here. But a fidget toy, sort of like this is a little squishy ball kind of thing I had sitting here. And there's so much that you can sense about this. You can sense the weight, how the weight feels in your hands. There's a netting on here, so it's got some texture to it. You can squeeze it and feel it in your hand. It makes some sound as you're squeezing it. If you have a nightlight on, you might even be able to see a bit. You can feel that it's round, So finding an object to hyper focus on, right? And it's just enough to get your brain to stop thinking about other stuff, but it's not too much to wake it up, And so it'll sort of bore you to sleep. And I think that's part of the challenge too, is I think we've become really uncomfortable with boredom. And, I think as individuals we have, and I think parents have become uncomfortable with their kids being bored, and I recognize, as a parent, you want your kid to be happy, you want them to be enjoying, but boredom is where problems get solved. That's how kids learn how to solve problems, is by being bored, and it's okay, And so that's one of the techniques that I'll give to kids, even teenagers, is find an object to focus on. The other one is something super simple, and I actually do it myself to go to sleep, but I teach kids this, and they usually look at me like I have 3 heads, and then they'll come back and they'll go, I tried that. And it worked. So it's literally just taking your finger and somewhere where you can reach comfortably, whether it's on your bed or the wall by your bed, making circles and counting the circles. And every time your brain tries to think about anything other than counting those circles, you restart the circles. You refocus on the circles. Again, it's boring your brain to sleep. It's giving something good enough to focus on, but not enough to wake you up.
Thank you for those wonderful tips.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Vicki.
No, I was just saying that's great. I have a bunch of those fidget balls and twisters, and I don't even know what half of them are called, but and then I also have putty. I've actually met someone over the past couple of years that makes aromatherapy putty. So it has the lavender, and I know like a lot of kids and people are sensitive to scents. So I know sometimes we try to stay away from that, like in school specifically. But for me and my children, I have lavender putty. So you're getting that relaxing scent on top of like mushing it and twisting it and doing that. But I have those exact same squishy balls too. So yeah, I think those are great. It's something they could still have fun with, and seeing them like actually like attentive to it, and it's relaxing them, or focusing on their breath as we're playing with it, you know, and it has nothing to do with the screen. It's putty, but like it's still, you know, relaxing, and you know, they're not bored. So
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm. Great.
was there anything also that you wanted to add as far as the nutrition component? Like, so you gave us some specific things with the sleep. Is there anything about the nutrition, or that's more so like they would come in and when in a session with you, they would really talk about like other specific things, that like drinking more water or limiting sugar? I mean, like stuff like that we could just kind of focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's sort of the basics that you would think of when it comes to good nutrition. You know, I know kids are picky, right? And you might have a hard time getting like the fruits and veggies and that kind of stuff in them. But as much as possible, trying to get those you know, natural sources of vitamins, minerals, that sort of thing. Drinking more water, limiting those sugary drinks. You know, having a cutoff time for, especially for sugary stuff, you know, saying, okay, after, you know, we have dessert at, you know, 6:30, 7 o'clock, and then there's nothing after that, you know. Or if you have a kid that, you know, sugar that late, you know, will, you know, put them in overdrive. Okay, well, maybe you can have your dessert with your lunch, you know, but then no dessert after dinner. So you don't want to completely take away those, you know, the joy of being a kid and being able to have those types of things, but recognizing how those things affect them. And, you know, just drawing limits, you know. I think as far as like the nutrition piece of things, like vitamins and that kind of thing, if your kid is super picky, definitely talking with your doctor about, okay, what kind of vitamins can I put them on to make sure that they're getting that. Excuse me. You know, just trying to make sure that you're limiting like processed foods, you know, as much as possible, which again, I know is, you know, everything that's going on right now, it's really hard to do that stuff, you know. But if you, let's say you're given processed foods, you know, 5 days a week right now, you know, and really on the weekends is the only day that you have time to cook, you know, try and see if you can, you know, find some ways to cut out some of the processed stuff, maybe 1 or 2 days a week. You know, I don't think anybody expects these big, huge transformations, you know, right out outset, but to just recognize it, notice it, and say, okay, where's one thing that we can maybe do differently. And I think when it comes to nutrition, it really does have to be a household thing, you know. It can't just be for the kid that has the ADHD or the anxiety. It's got to be a household endeavor. That's one thing that everybody has to be in it together on.
Great. Yes.
Wonderful.
And I'm hearing there too is that I'm hearing in your voice and in sharing all this is that it's with compassion with everybody in terms of right now we're not living in a typical world. So we're all working with this in the best way that we can.
Exactly.
In the present moment.
Yeah.
Great.
Mark, should we get into resources now?
Yes,
and
go ahead, Vicki.
information?
Yes, why don't you do that, please?
So Abby, I know you mentioned so much stuff. It's wonderful. I guess anything additional resources, books, support groups, I don't know, anything else community-based, I guess, that you would recommend?
So we don't currently, you know, a lot of groups I know are not happening because, like, a lot of like support groups, that kind of thing, are not happening because of what's going on. But I know that there are some resources, like, for example, Project Peak which is through Lehigh University.
Okay.
They do, it's for younger kids. It's for like pre-K to like kindergarten.
Okay.
But it's a project that they can apply for. And they start giving parenting strategies and education. They do assessments to see if the child, does have that ADHD diagnosis. And then they will provide parent strategies and free education if they're accepted into the program. So obviously that one's limited because they only take participants, but it's a really cool program. And at the same time, you're also sort of helping out with educating, the people who in the future are going to be the teachers and the people working with them. That's a really cool program. There are some, and I apologize because I had meant to write down the names of the groups and I forgot to, but there are, if you go on like Facebook, and type in Lehigh Valley, like ADHD parenting support, there are a couple of Facebook groups that it's just parents of kids with ADHD. Some of them also include parents, of kids with other diagnoses like autism and that sort of thing. But they can be really great resources as well. As far as books go, I have like I have a list of them that I think that are great.
Any favorites? Any go-to, like you mentioned the mindfulness workbook. I'm huge on workbooks, so I love that you recommended that. Like any other specific book that you're like, when I recommend this to parents, like they just really identify it being successful for their kids or their family outside of the mindfulness workbook?
Yeah. So one of the books, and it's an oldie but a goodie, is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. And then there's a follow-up, How to Talk So Kids Can Learn. And that one is really great resource for parents. I think parents in general, but especially with kids with ADHD. So I think that those are two really good ones. There's another one called Daredevils and Daydreamers. And I apologize, I know it has like a subtitle to it too, but I don't remember what it is. It's by Barbara Ingersoll, and it's a really cool one. I like that one too. And like I said, the mindfulness for ADHD for teens is one of my favorite workbooks to use. And that one, honestly, sometimes I'll even have some little ones, like when I'm trying to teach some more mindfulness stuff, I'll obviously modify it to work with them. But it really is a useful book, and it's useful across the lifespan. Again, mindfulness is, that's how that works. So.
That's
in terms of the anxiety, there are oh my goodness, my brain stopped working for a second. There's a couple books. So there's one that I use called What to Do When You Worry Too Much. That's a book. It's for little ones. It's age 6 to 12. I read that one. And then the other thing is that it's a book that it's actually sold by Usborne Books, but it's called the What If Monster, and it's a storybook. And, I just think that one's really good because it really, I think it's really good because little ones can recognize themselves in it and the kinds of worries that they have. And then there's also, for a little bit older, there's Wilma Jean the Worry Machine, and it's another storybook. But that one, too, because it has, the stories in it, and kids can really relate to it. But at the end, it actually has some resources for parents as well. So I think that those are all really good ones as far as anxiety goes.
I love that you're recommending storybooks because not every child is gonna be able to do like that typical therapy, which is why you started off saying about play therapy, right? And thinking outside the box. So kids like to read, but they're probably going to be much more interested in reading those actual stories or creative things versus like a general, like typical therapy workbook. So I love that you recommended those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love books. I have 2 bins of storybooks
Yeah.
behind me.
I love it. I love it. I
Wonderful.
agree. I'm constantly reading. Yeah. And what about contact information for you? So someone who was able to watch this whole program, if they want to reach out to you for more advice or schedule an appointment or whatever, what's the contact information?
So the number here for our office, and I will say that my schedule is pretty full. I am still taking new patients, but my schedule is pretty full. But there are a lot of other really great therapists here too. So the phone number for our office is 484-822-5700.
484-822-5700.
Yep.
Okay. All right, fantastic. Any last thoughts? I mean, Abby, that was amazing. I took so many notes. I can't. That was great. Mark, anything else you want to add, or Abby, anything else you would like to add?
I think for me, again, it just comes back to, I say all of this being very what's going on, and that if you can't do these things, it's okay to reach out for help. That don't be ashamed if you're a parent sitting there going, I don't know what to do. You're not alone in that, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing to recognize it and say, all right, I need to talk to somebody. We need to figure this out.
Sure, absolutely.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. That's so important. I think it's a great message to send out into the community. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Abby. You were amazing. So much great information. We really appreciate it. And you're more than welcome to always come back on as a guest, because I'm sure we could have probably talked for at least another hour about all this information. Thank you for our viewers for tuning in, and please feel free to contact us or Abby if you have any other questions or even suggestions on topics that you would like us to discuss in the future. All right, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.